Around 50,000 years ago, in the prehistoric forests of East Asia, the first humans arrived from Africa to live and to hunt. Just a few thousand individuals would become the ancestors of all the people of East Asia, Australia, and the Americas. This vast land was thought to be empty when they took their first steps here. But now it appears they were not alone. This remote cave in southwest China is the final resting place of strange, unknown humans. Their remains had lain undisturbed for millennia until a chance encounter brought them to light. Now we are faced with a shocking possibility. We may have unearthed a new species of human.
In a way, it's the sort of thing you wouldn't ask for. What we faced here was a discovery that challenged everything we understood about human evolution.
These ancient bones may change forever our understanding of where we came from and what makes us human. On a quiet mountain road in the Chinese province of Yunnan, two men from very different worlds are on a journey back in time. Ji Jueping, a Chinese paleontologist, is traveling with Australian paleoanthropologist Darren Curnow. They're on their way south to one of the most important archaeological sites in Asia.
I've wanted to work in Asia my whole career. I always saw Asia, East Asia, as an amazing opportunity. It's close to Australia. It would help us understand the origins of Indigenous Australians. But also Asia in many ways seemed to me to be like a blank canvas, particularly with the question of the origins of modern humans. Asia today has more than half the world's living population, but yet we know so little about their origins and their relationship to people in other parts of the world. How much? Oh, you didn't ask.
云南发现的晚期智人化石大约占全国的一半，但是其中有一件是让我们感到印象非常深、非常特别的，那就是马路洞人。
In 1989, mine workers accidentally unearthed ancient-looking human remains at this site in southern Yunnan. They lay alongside bones of red deer that once roamed this region. Locals soon dubbed the site Maladong, the Red Deer Cave. The mine was closed and the mysterious bones were moved to a nearby museum. There, they lay buried in the vaults, unstudied, for almost 20 years. Then in 2007, G invited Darren to help investigate these fossils. They were unlike any he had ever seen. They were charred and strange and included part of a skull with holes drilled into both sides.
它非常原始，看起来它的眉脊很发达。印象很深的是，它还有人工钻孔，这个在旧石器时代是非常少见的。
This is the most complete skull from Maludong, and it's also the one that has the most evidence for modification, alteration by humans. The entire base of the skull has been cut off, chipped away using stone tools, and then they've used another tool to smooth the edges and to actually polish it.
To understand what this skull cup means, They called in an expert in ancient human habits, cultural anthropologist Paul Tayson.
Yes, that's right.
The making of skull cups is a very modern form of behavior. Neanderthals didn't make skull containers. All the other known examples, past and present, were made from the skulls of modern humans. Sometimes these were made for use in ceremonies. They sometimes were made from the skulls of enemies. It was a way of insulting your enemy by drinking from their skull. Besides purposely shaping the edge of the skull to make it into a nice container, 2 holes were purposely drilled on either side, but not exactly in the center. They're drilled close to the front of the skull where most of the weight is. So the person who fashioned this was very ingenious. They figured out that since there was more weight here, put the holes closer to it, it will sit nicely in the air without spilling.
For Paul, this was the handiwork of a sophisticated modern human. But for Darren and G, the anatomy of the bones told a different story.
When we started to look at the remains in detail, it actually became very unsettling because they're just so unusual. In many ways, they just look so primitive. The shape of the eyebrow bone is really unusual, very prominent, and the brain case itself is really low and very rounded. These look like they should be 1 or 2 or maybe even 300,000 years old.
The enigmatic features of the red deer cave fossils pose puzzling questions about human origins in this part of the world. To date, much of the focus on human evolution has been a long way from Maladong, across the world in Africa, considered to be the birthplace of our direct ancestors and the cradle of all humanity.
So the first few million years of our evolution were in Africa with these ape-like 2-footed creatures. And they gave rise to Homo erectus. Homo erectus is the first human-like creature to leave Africa. It settled Europe and East Asia and survived in Asia until about 500,000 years ago. And we appear in the record, the fossil record, about 200,000 years ago. Modern humans, or Homo sapiens. And a subset of us left Africa about 80,000 years ago, settled the rest of the planet and gave rise to all living people.
The out of Africa story remains the predominant theory for the origin of all human species.
Well, it's overwhelmingly an African-European story. I think it's fair to say that there's been a bias in our work for almost 100 years, where most of the work has been done in Africa and Europe, and most of the evidence has come from those places.
As our ancestors colonized the globe, they entered unknown territories. In Europe, they encountered the Neanderthals, our closest ancient human cousins. But most anthropologists believe that by the time modern humans arrived in Asia, all previous human species there had died out. Then in 2004, on the island of Flores in Indonesia, scientists discovered fossils of an ancient creature. No more than 1 meter tall and with a tiny brain, Homo floresiensis revolutionized the long-held theories of human evolution. It came to be known as the Hobbit.
When the Hobbit was found, many of us just couldn't believe what was being proposed. Here was something that looked like human-like creatures of 3 million years ago, surviving until 17,000 years ago in Indonesia, on an island with sophisticated culture. It didn't make any sense.
The Hobbit really threw things up in the air, because that was the first of its kind being something really completely outlandish being found.
Professor Bert Roberts was part of the original team that discovered the Hobbit.
In the recent past, as in the last few tens of thousands of years, we thought it was a much simpler situation. There was us, Homo sapiens, there was Neanderthals in Western Asia and Europe, and the rest of the world was pretty much empty of other human species. And suddenly, out of nowhere, we've got a brand new type of human who's still surviving until very, very recently, and yet such an ancient design. You think, wow, if we can find this brand new species just below the ground today, how many are we missing out there? Maybe we've been misidentifying things in the past. Maybe we just haven't been looking in the right places.
There are vast expanses of unexplored territory across Asia. Scientists have barely scratched the surface of what lies beneath. In 2008, Darren and G made their first journey back to the Red Deer Cave.
We didn't really know how old the site was when we started working there. There were suggestions that it could have been towards the end of the Ice Age, but there was a very real chance that it could have been considerably older. And that was an exciting prospect, exciting opportunity. When you start digging a site like this, you're aware of the fact that you're actually the first people to be exposing things from the ground. You're the first people to see these things since the people who actually used the cave tens of thousands of years ago. And it gives you a real connection to your ancestors, to the way that we lived for millions of years in our evolution. And there's always the excitement if you don't know what's going to be revealed by the next stroke of the trowel or the brush. So.
And what was revealed were layers and layers of ash.
马楼洞遗址的剖面保存得非常好，而且人类活动的信息非常丰富，比如说烧骨、烧土、炭，还有火塘。
This ash is as fine as you would see if the fire was built only last week. It's really quite incredible. The preservation is just extraordinary. And you can see pieces of charcoal. And this orange, in fact, is actually burnt clay. So it's soil that was on top of the fire. It was so hot that it's baked it. And when we look at the hearths, we actually find animal bones and animal teeth. And so they've actually come in and they've cooked, particularly deer bones, and then they've butchered them on the side. So these amazingly thick layers of ash represent huge fires that were being built up in the cave over a period of about 1,000 years. It's probably the deepest ash sequence or hearth that's been found in China, possibly one of the largest in the world.
The Red Deer Cave was just beginning to reveal fascinating glimpses into Stone Age life in China. And then it all went wrong.
My heart sank when we found what we thought was a bit of pottery.
Pottery is one of the most enduring of man-made materials, but it is a very recent innovation.
I was hoping to find a site that was tens of thousands of years old, maybe a site that might tell us about the earliest people in the area, but instead I thought we'd found a site that was only a few thousand years old. We were feeling disappointed, actually. We thought maybe the site was just another early farming site, that maybe in fact it wasn't going to be a site that might give us some real insights of our understanding of human evolution.
But the mystery of the Red Deer Cave was far from over. Back at the museum, sacks of fossils collected from the original excavation were pulled out of the coffers. Until now, they had been long forgotten.
We really had no idea just how many bones there were, how rich the site was. There were bags and bags of these fossils that had been removed that were just waiting to be studied.
When Darren and G examined the bones, they were shocked.
I'd never seen a set of human remains like this ever before. Every bone that we looked at had been modified in some way. Some had been cut, some had been burned, and others painted in ochre.
这些人骨是从外面带来的，而且是在之前就已经死了的人。
They built these massive fires in the cave, and sometimes they'd throw on complete limbs, entire body parts, and other times it was parts of bodies, sometimes even just the bones themselves. When you find evidence for the burning of human bones, you always think that there are two possibilities. One of those could be cremation and some sort of ceremony associated with burial or death. The other, of course, is the very real possibility that human remains are actually cooked.
Could cannibalism be at the heart of the Red Deer Cave mystery? Within the cave's walls are whispering echoes of a macabre event and clues that don't make scientific sense. The human remains from Red Deer Cave had become a Stone Age mystery, and this mystery was about to get a lot more complicated. In 1996, while moving artifacts from a provincial museum to his institute, G noticed a curious block of rock on the shelf. The rock had been discovered by a lone geologist at a place called Long Lin, 300 kilometers northeast of Red Deer Cave. It had sat on the shelf unnoticed for 3 decades.
G said he had something to show me. A surprise, a little present. G was holding a rock that had a skull inside it.
露出来的这一部分，刚好是眼眶上边的这个眉弓这一部分，就是眼眶的上半部分，引起了我的好奇心。
I looked at it and thought, what is this? This looks like something that could be hundreds of thousands of years old. Why is he showing me this? What does he want to do with this?
My first impression is must be primitive human fossil, just similar to Megalodon.
And that moment actually changed the course of our research together.
They had just unlocked the door into China's mysterious collections when G discovered yet another forgotten fossil from the Long Lin site.
龙鳞的下颌骨标本，在古人类研究室的标本室，停留了20年，没有人引起人们的注意。
It was a big surprise because I didn't know that there was a jaw, but also it had been put together in such a way that that actually made an artificial chin, a fake chin, looked like a modern human. And G and I studied it really carefully, and we actually found that the bones fitted together naturally in quite a different way, and we had a very different looking jaw.
It would take 2 years of painstaking reconstruction, but finally the skull was liberated from the rock.
It was the weirdest looking thing I'd ever seen.
It looks so unusual compared to like other casts of modern human.
Darren is convinced it belongs with the jaw.
What did I see? I saw Darth Vader. I was confused, I was elated, I was perplexed. It had this really bizarre mix of features, unexpected mix. There were hints of modern human features. There were these really ancient-looking features. In my own mind, I didn't know what I was going to do with this.
This confusing mix of features bears a striking resemblance to those found in the fossils from Megalodon.
So we felt that the best way to approach this, given that we thought they were quite similar, was to have them in the same population, have them as belonging to the same group.
Now Darren and G are confronted with someone, or perhaps something, they really did not expect to meet. They had come face to face with the Red Deer Cave people. This primitive-looking creature once roamed the prehistoric forests of Yunnan. The question is, just how long ago?
That face is, I mean, that's not a modern human face. That level of projection like that is what you see in Africa maybe 2 million years ago, 1.5 million years ago. That's not.
To make sense of these archaic-looking fossils, the team needed to find out how old they were. Luckily, within the cavity of the skull, embedded in the rock, they discovered tiny pieces of charcoal. These, together with charcoal remnants of the ancient fires at the Red Deer Cave, were sent for radiocarbon dating.
I was sent the dating results, and I didn't believe the numbers. I got on the phone, I rang my colleague and I said, "Are you sure these are right.
The Maladong fossils were just 14,500 years old, and the Longling skull was even younger, only 11,500 years old.
I couldn't believe it. I was absolutely flabbergasted. In fact, I jumped out of my chair and I was jumping around the room like a kid.
最初根据龙陵人和马劳洞人的形态特征，我们估计它应该是比较古老。但是当年代测定结果出来以后，才1万多年，我们非常吃惊。这是一个等待我们去解开的一个谜。
This means that the Red Deer Cave people were alive at the same time and in the same place as modern human hunter-gatherers.
The Red Deer Cave people are unlike any modern human we've seen before, whether they're 150 or 150,000 years old. This means they're either very unusual modern humans or perhaps belong to a different group, different species, but they're not us.
The suggestion of a new human species is arguably the boldest statement an evolutionary scientist can make. In March 2012, the team take the daring step to publish this possibility.
Distinctly odd fossil evidence found in
the so-called Red Deer Cave people had flat faces with broad
even
noses.
Even though it's a confusing picture,
it wouldn't be the first discovery that's led to debate over whether a scientist has found a new species.
I'm a little sceptic about the last
one. They're reluctant to call it a new species just yet, and some other experts have their doubts.
In a way, it's the sort of thing you wouldn't ask for, because it's so challenging, so confronting. The fact that they were just so weird and so young for me was exciting, but I knew I faced a big challenge to convince my colleagues of the significance of what we'd found.
In the world of paleoanthropology, the same fossils inspire radically different interpretations among scientists, depending on which school of thought they belong to. It's been called a science of exquisitely informed speculation.
Nobody looks at a fossil with a completely open mind. I suppose to some extent also we see what we think. So you come to a fossil and you have an idea about the way you think human evolution worked, and the first thing you do is try and fit that fossil into your worldview. I think that's human nature.
This is a science which struggles with possibly the biggest questions of all. Who are we? And what makes a modern human? For the past 30 years, our understanding of what sets us apart from other human species has perhaps been most influenced by paleoanthropologist Chris Stringer.
If we look just at the morphology, for me, everyone alive today shares certain features in the skeleton. So we have a high and rounded skull.
When we look at the Longling skull and we look at the forehead, we can see that it does have some modern human-like features. So it has a forehead that arcs backwards, curves backwards.
We have a small face tucked under the brain case.
And the face is actually quite short, like a modern human.
We have a chin on the lower jaw. We have a lightly built skeleton. So these sorts of features are shared around the planet, and for me they diagnose what a modern human is anatomically.
So there are a couple of modern human features, but then there are all these features that are really very ancient. If we have a look at the lower jaw, this really important feature that we see in modern humans of a triangular chin is actually missing. We can't see it, and the teeth are massive. On top of that, it also has some unusual, some unique features that are found only in the Red Deer Cave people. So it has quite a prominent brow, and the cheeks are incredibly flat, and they flare out to the sides of the face as they curve around the skull. And when we put them together, we see that it has this massive jaw, that the two jaws together sit well forward of the face, and it's really unusual. Certainly for a modern human, it's a very ancient feature. These bones aren't modern, and they're not meant to be around at that time, but yet they are.
14,500 years ago, southwest China was released from the grip of the Ice Age and filled with lush forested basins teeming with life. This was the world of the Red Deer Cave people. Theirs was a land of the oldest and most isolated mountain peaks, the deepest valleys, and the biggest rivers of all of Asia. It was a landscape that had an indelible impact on its people.
今天的云南有很多少数民族的群体，这让我们想到马劳动人、农民人生活的时代，可能也有很多现代人的不同群体。
Could this hotspot of human diversity have given rise to isolated groups that look so different?
What's actually led to the unusual features in the red DK people, we simply don't know yet. But one possibility is that it was the development of a population that was isolated, that had particular environmental conditions, maybe a particular kind of diet required stronger jaw muscles, which modified the face. That's a possibility. There could be environmental features which change the shape of the skull and the body.
Could the Red Deer Cave people simply be modern humans who have morphed back into more primitive-looking beings because of something in the water?
In evolution, we call that a reversal. It's unprecedented in human evolution. There are no other examples that I can think of any human group that was isolated for tens of thousands of years, and then suddenly its anatomy emerged after that time to look like ancestors of hundreds of thousands of years ago. In my understanding, in my experience, it runs counter to our understanding of 7 million years of human evolution. The problem for me is that if they're modern human and they lack so many features, so many characteristics of modern human, so if we say, okay, maybe they're early, very early modern human, very primitive modern human, if that's the case, then why aren't they 100,000 years old?
As Darren and G ponder the puzzle of the Red Deer Cave people, other scientists offer their own explanations.
Chris Stringer and other people suggested could be hybrid.
I think the red deer cave finds are extremely important. I don't think they represent a distinct species from us, but they really do document the variation in modern human populations in the last 50,000 years.
Chris Stringer is the architect of the Out of Africa theory and firmly believed that modern humans replaced all other ancient species as they migrated across the world.
My view was we had a recent African origin, and that could be virtually 100% of the story. But what we've learned, of course, in the last few years is that there was indeed some interbreeding with the Neanderthals, with people over in the Far East called the Denisovans, who we've only really learnt about in the last couple of years from their DNA.
In 2010, in another remote cave nestled within the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia, ancient DNA was found preserved within a finger bone and a single tooth. From these tiny fragments, scientists decoded the entire genome of a new group they called the Denisovans.
Not only do we have this new species of Denisovans in southern Siberia, but that Denisovan DNA turns up in people in Melanesia, Papua New Guinea and areas like that, and in Aboriginal Australians. The fact you've got Denisovan DNA persisting in modern-day people means there must have been interaction between that kind of ancient human and Homo sapiens to get it into our genome at some point in time. So there's no reason why you can't have archaic humans surviving in other places too.
Since we know there was interbreeding with ancient humans, perhaps some of these features are reflecting interbreeding in the past. Maybe in China, the same thing could have been happening with the red deer cave people. In terms of modelling how the interbreeding happened, I mean, obviously we don't actually know, and it could range all the way from peaceful encounters where they traded with each other and exchanged mates. That's one possibility. The other extreme is a group will run out of mates and they'll raid another area and steal some women.
These encounters have left their mark within us today. hidden in our genes.
There are suggestions that certainly in the immune systems, modern humans have picked up some of the bits of DNA from these archaic people. So imagine modern humans evolving in Africa, coming into new environments with new diseases, new pathogens and so on. By interbreeding with the locals, they could get a quick fix in picking up some of the immunity which those populations would have evolved over hundreds of thousands of years.
Could the Red Deer cave people be hybrid offspring of modern and ancient human parents?
Hybrid's a really complicated question. To diagnose a hybrid, you need probably to have DNA from Maludong and Longlen fossil, but also you need DNA from both of the parent species. So if we assume one is us, one is modern human, who's the other species? I'm not convinced that interbreeding has been unequivocally established. It's an interesting idea, and I think there's some compelling, maybe persuasive evidence, but it's far from open and shut.
To try to untangle the genetic origins of the Red Deer cave people, Darren and G send samples of the burnt bones for DNA testing. Ancient DNA science unlocked the genome of the Denisovans from their remains preserved in an icy corner of Siberia. But the Red Deer cave fossils are a different challenge altogether.
Fossil DNA is not easy to work with because the bones have been buried for many, many years. So especially for this sample, they're buried in Yunnan. Yunnan is a hot and relatively humid area. So those conditions are not good for Asian DNA storage.
Yeah. What do you think? Do you think it would be okay?
Professor Su Bing is one of China's leading geneticists. A decade ago, he led the team that mapped the DNA of over 10,000 living East Asians in search of their origins.
From this data, what we saw is a very simple conclusion. We all came from Africa. We all have African ancestors.
But not all scientists accept this genetic evidence. There are those that promote what is known as multi-regional theory. They believe that instead of all members of our species coming out of Africa, some modern humans evolved out of Asia. To explore this theory, Darren and G traveled to nearby Guangxi province. Here amongst this spectacular limestone landscape lies Chirendong, the mysterious cave of the Homo sapiens. In 2007, Professor Jin Chongchu and his team unearthed 2 archaic human teeth here. A year later, they discovered something even more remarkable.
到了2008年，在这个位置上，我们发现了它的下颌骨，发现以后大家都觉得很兴奋。
The primitive jawbone was found to have some striking and unexpected features.
开始有个下巴壳，这是它一大的特征。所以完了以后，
A protruding chin is a defining modern human feature.
这个齿槽和这个之间有个它们这些沟是开始就是已经形成的过程，所以这是现代人早期现代人，就是这是特征上是很明显的。
When they dated the fossils, they found they were over 100,000 years old. But the conventional theory holds that the earliest modern humans arrived from Africa around 50,000 years ago. This would mean that modern humans were here 50,000 years before they were supposed to be.
智人洞的发现对现代人走出非洲说提出了挑战，因为它证明了在东亚地区有早于10万年前的现代人的化石。
This is the heart of the biggest controversy in the science of human evolution. The idea that modern-day Chinese are descended from a separate evolutionary line to the rest of the world.
In China, they believe that the Chinese Homo erectus fossils are their direct ancestors, and they can see, in their interpretation, a continuity of evolution in terms of morphology and behaviour from 1 million years ago through to present Chinese populations.
要说现代人起源是走出非洲，还是在亚洲地区或者是在欧亚大陆独立起源的这个问题，现在很复杂。我不完全支持非洲起源，走出非洲说。
I gave a talk there in the 1990s on the Out of Africa theory, and it didn't go down very well, as you can imagine. And I was told that they knew they were evolved from Peking man. It was almost like an act of faith.
I think they've demonstrated that modern humans got to East Asia much earlier than the genetic evidence would suggest. I think that's very important.
This is the viewpoint of out of Africa, but for Martin Reginer viewpoint, they find more very solid evidence, fossil evidence for continuity. From archaic to modern.
G believes that the Chirindong fossils are proof that modern humans in this part of the world evolved here in East Asia. Whichever theory prevails, Darren sees the find as an important clue as to the identity of the Red Deer Cave people.
What's impressed me about the Chirindong jaw is that it does seem to have a human-like chin. You don't see a human-like chin in the Red Deer Cave people jaws. The Red Deer Cave people don't look very modern in comparison. And I think if Chirindong do represent an early modern population, then the Red Deer Cave people can't be.
But the hunt for fossil DNA that could confirm this has been unsuccessful.
Unfortunately, we haven't got any positive result, but we didn't get any DNA.
There's very little biological material left in the bones and teeth from Maludong. This is because they've been burned to such high temperatures. What it means, unfortunately, is that there's really no chance of getting DNA from them.
Despite the lack of DNA, Darren is convinced that the bones speak for themselves. He's driven to the only conclusion that makes sense to him.
After 5 years of working on this big puzzle, this conundrum, losing sleep, travelling to and from China to check and recheck, I place these fossils into, what we know, what we understand about human evolution. I just can't see that they're anything other than a new species.
It's an idea bound to create shockwaves throughout the scientific world.
Science is very conservative. So when people find new things that don't fit into current, widely held models, or they come up with new theories, they're challenged, they're ridiculed. Sometimes their careers suffer.
As soon as you make some announcement that's unexpected, there's always going to be detractors. I mean, why would there be a new species of human survive in mainland China until beyond the last ice age?
尽管我们发现马楼洞农林头盖骨非常特别的特征，但是如果要命名一个新种，我们要非常谨慎，我们要有非常多的证据。
Yes, it's risky. Of course it's risky. But in a way, if you're going to be honest and true to science, then you've got to be prepared to stand up and say, this is how I see the evidence. It's a challenge to conventional wisdom, but then that's how science progresses. That's how we improve our understanding of the world, and in this case, our own origins.
Darren and G are preparing to show the Red Deer cave fossils to a scientific heavyweight, someone whose judgment could either confirm or quash their own opinions. Jeffrey Schwartz is one of the few scientists in the world to have studied virtually the entire human fossil record.
Yes, Professor.
Wow. Gosh, the actual things. Can I touch?
You're welcome to, if you want to.
Oh, that would be super. So you think that surface has been modified?
There's some cut marks.
Right, I see that one.
Holes on either side of it.
Right, but then you got the break.
Yeah.
And then you have the change in the plane of the bone.
Yeah.
And that's what's diagnostic.
Here's an occipital fragment, and I can't find any muscle markings.
Nothing.
On this. Nothing at all.
Nothing.
Neat long
Oh, there it is. Okay, so what's interesting is the shape of the frontal so different. One thing that's very prominent is that you have this huge maxillary tuberosity. You would actually see some kind of more verticality here.
That's right, absolutely. This unusual shelving here.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you're saying. There's only one specimen I know of where the cheek region flares out like that. Yeah. And it's one specimen from about 1.65, 1.7 million years old from East Africa. It's one of the most unusual things in the human fossil record, and it certainly isn't like any living human I've studied, any human skull that I've studied. And I've studied thousands of them over years. Certain features of the face here, you don't see in any living human. I would call it a different species, but I know that sort of sends off a lot of alarms and stuff, but I think it's a different thing.
We agree.
This is really one of the top paleontological experiences of my life.
Fantastic, good. Excellent work. I felt as though this cloud of doubt that I'd had about my work, my ideas for the last 5 years just suddenly lifted, and that I had actually for the first time some real independent support and verification of what we've found. It was absolutely thrilling.
So the big shot, Professor Jeffrey coming, wow, after today's check, we don't want to move to another project, move to another site. I want to continue. I discussed with Darren, we should continue this research, more productive in the future.
So the Red Deer Cave people could be the youngest non-Homo sapiens that we've found anywhere in the world. They're also in East Asia, which is an area that we thought was actually uninhabited by the time modern humans settled the area. We've always thought that modern humans, Neanderthals, share a common ancestor 400,000 years ago. One of the implications of the Red Deer Cave people is that maybe there was a branching event later on, that in fact maybe a group butted off the line that was leading to Homo sapiens 200,000 or 300,000 years ago, and that group is something like the Red Deer Cave people, a group that's almost us but not quite us.
It's an astonishing concept to imagine a coexistence of two human groups that are so similar but also so different. What would their first encounter have been like? This wasn't simply a different tribe. This was another creature altogether.
What the discovery means is that when modern humans left Africa, that it wasn't just the Neanderthals that they encountered. In fact, they met up with the Denisovans, they met up with the Red Deer Cave people. It's not just a scenario of superior modern humans leaving Africa and taking over the world. In fact, they had to fight for it, that it wasn't an easy process, and that there were very complex interactions along the way. There's the possibility, I guess, with the Red Deer Cave people. We interacted with them. What sorts of interactions were there? There's the obvious immediate in the landscape competition. Maybe we interbred with them. Maybe we inherited aspects of our behaviour and culture from them. Could that interaction have shaped our own evolution?
What's significant about the Maladong specimens is that they really demonstrate the existence at the same time of different species with our species, Homo sapiens. And then I think the ultimate question is, why did they disappear, how did they disappear, and why are we the only species still around?
There is one clue. We know the Red Deer Cave people were still surviving at the dawn of the greatest revolution in the history of humankind.
Beginning about 20,000 years ago, modern humans began agriculture. As agriculture developed, It was changing the people who were engaging in it, their rituals, their relationships to the land, eventually to even their morphology, but also they began changing the land through farming. That may have severely impacted on remaining groups of Red Deer Cave people who were true hunter-gatherers.
The farming revolution led to a whole suite of new diseases being experienced by people. It was the beginnings of the population explosion that we think about over the last few thousand years. Worldwide, there were maybe a handful of people, several million people living as hunter-gatherers, and in a fairly quick period of time, that doubled, trebled, to the point where we've now got 7 billion people living across the planet. No other site in the world has archaic human remains that are dated to around the time that farming is beginning. And it does raise the possibility that the invention of farming may have bumped off the Red Deer Cave people.
If you look at recent human history, what you see is as settlements increase in number and density, human warfare and the like increases. And in terms of nature, we're the only really bellicose or war-engaging species. And it may not be a pleasant thought to think that we're the cause of the extinction of these very recent species that were our relatives.
Whether it was sheer bad luck or forces of a different kind, the Red Deer Cave people may have been the last of nature's experiments before modern humans were left as the lone surviving human species. As to the fate of those individuals found inside the cave, there are clues hidden in the charred remains.
One of the key questions that we ask when we see burnt human bone is, was it cannibalism? So we look closely to see the nature of cut marks and fracturing and burning. And if we look at this material, we find that there aren't many cut marks like you would expect if the meat was cut off and after cooking in the fire. What also is really unusual that we never see with cannibalism is that after the bones were burnt, they were painted with ochre. Now, if this had been simply used for food, the bones would have been discarded and we would see burning, but not ochre. But with many of the pieces from Malodong, we see both. So I'm convinced that there's a form of burial practice happening rather than cannibalism.
This is probably a really special place for the people who were occupying the cave and coming here, performing ceremonies, building large fires. They were cremating probably their relatives, maybe people who were important in their group. And then later their bones were cut and painted with red ochre, so they had special value to them.
Until now, modern humans are thought to be the only species that have made skull cups and painted the bones of their dead.
That's one of the fascinating aspects of the archaeology of Malodong, is there are a number of different forms of what we would call modern human behavior that appear to have been practiced by another species. These were intelligent, compassionate people who performed special rituals for their dead. They mourned their dead. They might even have had a concept of the afterlife. These people, whatever species it was, they were not that different to us, and that tells us we are not unique.
But there is an alternative explanation for what happened inside the Red Deer Cave. The fossils reveal yet another twist in this unfolding mystery.
There's more than one hominid on this table.
那就它证实了这个谜团的存在。先夫人看就是，不同种的化石都在这儿存在吗？
More than one hominid for sure.
What he actually said was pretty remarkable. He actually suggested that we may have 3 different species in the fossils. Us, modern humans, and then 2 brand new, previously unknown archaic species. This would be one of the only sites that's known in the world where you've got 3 distinct groups using the same place.
The other conclusion that can explain this mix is that it was actually modern humans engaging in the modern human behavior with the remains of the Red Deer Cave people. Why were modern humans doing this? What was their relationship with Red Deer Cave people? Was it a close one, and were they honoring the dead Red Deer Cave people? Or were they driving them to extinction and purposely killing them? It is an incredible story, no matter which hypothesis we ultimately accept.
We may never fully understand what actually happened inside this cave. All we really know is that the Red Deer Cave people were once here, and now they are gone.
For me, one of the profound implications of the Red Deer Cave people is that here's a group of humans that aren't us, they're almost us. They share some characteristics with us. It forces us to rethink, the space that we've created for ourselves as humans, the way we've identified ourselves, the way we think we interact with the world, is narrowing. So it forces us to rethink the concept, the very basic idea of what it means to be a human. It's important philosophically because it challenges the concepts that we apply to ourselves, the way we define ourselves, the way we think about our place in nature. I think it alters that. Hi.
Hello.
Darren, hi.
Hello, Darren.
Wow.
I'm Craig, how are you?
I'm very well. I'm absolutely stunned. You're real.
I know.
My Red Deer Cave person, you're real.
That's right.
An amazing thing to see, the bones, if you like, come to life, flesh real in front of me. There's this new evidence from China of a distinct group, probably a new species, living in the landscape, sharing the landscape with people just like us.
Sure.
When you describe a new species, you have to give a scientific name, Latin name.
Yeah.
And one of the names that we've talked about, we've proposed with Chinese colleagues is Homo mituanus.
enigma 用中文怎么讲？我就告诉他谜团。
And mituan is actually Chinese for enigma or great puzzle.
Mystery.
So we think of you as our enigma man.
We are only just starting to piece together this story of millions of years of our evolution, from fragments of bones and stones.
Every culture has creation or origin stories. What's different here is that we're weaving a story, a narrative, from scientific evidence. Everybody cares about where they came from and the place of humans in the natural world, where we fit in the cosmos. This is the ultimate story for us.
In the 21st century, our sense of ourselves as a superior species still informs so much about how we relate to the world around us.
It was simple when it was just the Neanderthals, because we could demonize them or make them out to be primitive cavemen and, dumb, and we were the smart ones. We got out of Africa, we conquered them. But it's not that simple anymore, because there are Denisovans, there are the Red Deer Cave people, there's the Hobbit. Suddenly, we're not this incredibly smart group that was destined to take over the world. It's not like that.
The Red Deer Cave people may be the closest members of our diverse human family to have walked amongst us.
For most of the 7.5 million years that we've been evolving, we've shared the landscape with other human-like creatures.
We competed with them for resources. We occasionally had sex with them. Today, that's not the case. We find ourselves alone. But yet the Red Deer Cave people show that just 11,000 years ago, we weren't alone. Why is that the case? This is the ultimate question for us. Why are we alone today?
Perhaps the greatest legacy of our long-gone ancient relatives is how they remind us of our incredibly good fortune to be here at all.